Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Winnipeg. Today, I'm truly excited because this is going to be a wonderful learning opportunity for all of us, and I mean that sincerely for all of us. We're going to talk about city politics, municipal level politics, and I'm very grateful that Dr. Aaron Moore from the Political Science Division of faculty, at the University of Manitoba has joined us. He is an expert in municipal politics, in city politics, and I have not heard that term. And I'll be quite honest, I have not heard the term that we have an expert finally on municipal politics because as we were talking just a little bit before we started the program, there's so much unknown about municipal politics and really what we're responsible for. So thank you so much for being here to help us understand what municipal politics and city politics is all about. So I'm going to start it off. There's not a lot of questions I have, but I want to turn it over to you to kind of give us, I guess, the 101 version of municipal politics and why it's so important to us.
I teach an entire seminar or an entire year course on this topic, so I could go on forever. But I think a lot of people don't understand how much of their services and their infrastructure are provided by the municipal level. We focus, in part because it's on the media, and I say the topics are more sexy at the provincial and federal level. That's what people are aware of. But if you look at the daily services you rely on, your water, your garbage pickup, it sounds mundane, but if you don't have that, you have significant health issues. That's one of the things I drive home with my students. If we look at parts of the world that don't have this, they have all of these issues. Policing, fire service, and then maintaining our streets, all those types of things are at the municipal level. So the majority of services that we consume are provided by the municipal government, not from the provincial and federal. In fact, the federal government we consume the least services from. They don't provide a lot compared to provincial and municipal. So I think that's one of the important things to know about when we're talking about cities, why it's important. And a lot of people simply don't understand it. I do know most people don't understand the property tax at all. And I think my students hate me because I go in a lot of detail about that. But it's so different from any other types of tax, and it's also very visible. And the politics is very different. There are exceptions in Canada, but most of our cities don't have political parties, and that affects how things are done. It has a pretty significant impact on politics and government. And we also have the weird tension between administration and elected officials that we don't see at senior levels, because senior levels, elected officials are the heads of departments. We don't have that equivalent at the municipal level. So I think a lot of what we're seeing in Winnipeg, it's not uncommon across Canada. It's that sort of tension about, okay, what is the role of the elected official versus the city staff? And that's sort of, as we've transitioned to having full-time councillors, that's been a recurring issue. So there's a lot of important things that city government does, or municipal government does, and a lack of knowledge on it. So I think it's great to have any discussion on it.
Well, actually, thank you very much for that explanation. And it does clarify, because you'll hear councillors of the past that always talk about, we're in charge of pipes, roads, parks, that kind of, those kind of objectives. It's very true with what you're saying. We are a service provider. Mm-hmm. That's really what we're here to do. We have I guess we're the level of government that, from what I've seen in the 2 years, we're more of a corporation that provides a service than any other level of government, because, as you alluded to, we have to have these services in place for taxpayers. They expect that. Do you think, though, that has, based on your knowledge, which is obviously extensive, has municipal politics gotten away from where they should be focusing and tried to blend in with other levels of government? And I guess the way I always would explain it to people is that we seem to be driving outside of our lane an awful lot.
You could say that. I think part of the issue too, though, is since probably at least the 80s and 90s, particularly provincial level, is requiring municipalities to do more, or the provinces have simply backed off from providing a lot of the services they used to. And municipalities are in a position where there are these issues that need to be addressed that aren't really supposed to be in their wheelhouse, but they also feel need to be addressed. So that's where you get that sort of murkiness. They start talking about other issues that wouldn't traditionally be part of their mandate. But I mean, at the same time, if you go back to like before the welfare state in Canada was created, that's municipalities were doing that already, because literally the provincial and federal government, like there was no provincially funded hospitals, there was no like provincially funded education. So the municipalities were doing that de facto. And I think that's sort of what's happening is, municipalities are getting sort of sucked into these other areas. And there's a lot of things too. I mean, there are certain parts of what municipalities do that are going to be more political than others, like planning. The planning is a huge political issue at the municipal level. And that's usually where a lot of conflicts come up from. But, most people, they just expect all of those other services and stuff to be done. So that doesn't really bubble to the surface. And unfortunately, that means sometimes they're neglected in terms of like people paying attention to ensure that we're getting services we need, that sort of thing.
So I've often said, in my own opinion, of course, that I've always thought city council is more as a board of directors, if you will, that oversees the public service. We don't necessarily have total control, but we oversee it. We review budgets, we review what's going on, and we try to point them in the direction that we think residents want and the services that are most important. Is that a fair description of what city council is, or am I off the mark with that?
I think traditionally that's what it's been. And I mean, the municipalities have changed a lot. They've evolved a lot over time. But when they originally created, I mean, they are corporations. And they were certainly perceived as primarily responsible for service delivery. The other thing too, and I won't go into a long history discussion, but if you go back and, Canada were always influenced by things happening in the United States, but they went through the struggles. They used to have these city governments that were dominated by political machines that were basically the Republicans and the Democrats. And they used their position to basically ensure they got out the vote and stuff like that. And then you had the reformers come in, and the reformers were basically saying, no, because there's a lot of corruption and stuff. They're saying, no, we don't, this has to be about service delivery. The issue there, though, is in the process, they really took almost all the power away from elected officials. So it became very technocratically run. Sorry, I was getting a junkie call there. So, yeah, since then, we've been sort of fighting to get a balance, right? We want, my apologies.
That's okay. No, that is today's world.
Yeah, I'll just turn it off. I never get calls except when I'm on video. So yeah, I think that we're still dealing with that tension. And I mean, you look even at Winnipeg. This is one thing I would love it if the report had gone into, and maybe it will in the final report. But I'm pointing to the side. Well, they can't see me. It's a podcast. But anyways, the history, like the city of Winnipeg had a commissioner system up until the late 90s. And the commissioner system, almost all of the authority was put into these appointed commissioner positions, and then the mayor sat on the commission with them. But I think it was Susan Thomas who fought against that, right, saying that. And you had a part-time council who were literally just there to, as you say, vet whatever was presented to them from the commission. And there's problems with that. And that's why we get full-time councils. And this has been, we've seen similar changes happening across Canada. There's varieties of the systems, but we haven't figured out the exact formula that works best, right? And I think too, again, a lot of people, they understand how politics works at the federal level and how parties work. I think some councillors come in expecting it to be similar to that, but it's not. It's very, very different. And that tension is something that, as I said, we haven't really worked it out yet. And I think that's where a lot of frustration is. And you can see that in the report. The frustrations of councillors, on the one hand, wanting more access, wanting information, but city staff who, particularly lower level city staff, are always worried about that because they don't want to, their boss to get upset with them because they're talking to this councillor, and city staff still sometimes being a little withholdent But they're protecting their turf and themselves, I guess. But that tension exists there, and as I said, we haven't figured out a way to navigate it yet.
A very true statement, and obviously bang on. Funny because I had to come inside to really see that for myself clearly. We have ideas of that there's some dysfunction, that there's issues, of course, between elected officials and the public service. But when you get inside and you do start getting down into the details, you can really see the silos, as I call them, or a wall that has been built. I want to talk a little bit about, because you referenced what you were pointing at, the governance review. So in Winnipeg, we have, I guess it's commonly referred to as the big mayor model. It has been criticized. It was brought in by Mayor Susan Thompson. And at that time, because she couldn't get anything on her agenda done, she felt she had to kind of, position the power. And I understand that at that particular point in time. But today, I think what it's done in council is it's created that two-party system now on a council where everyone in this building does identify in some way, shape, or form with a political party. And I don't understand that, because this is the one place where you could come, as you said. It's not the United States where even if you're running for dog catcher, it seems you have to declare where your party loyalty goes. But internally, at the city council level, we shouldn't be doing that. We should be all for one for all. Is that something that when we look at that executive policy model, or you look at how one person can gain control of the majority, how should we be addressing something like that at the municipal level? Is that going to be effective, or is it not going to be effective?
So there's a whole lot to unpack here. I'll start with one thing.
Yeah, sorry.
One of the issues right now is the current mayor. I would probably do the same thing if I was mayor, but including the deputy mayor and the acting deputy mayor within the EPC, because the charter itself is pretty clear that the EPC should not be a majority. And if you take that out, if you actually have that, or if you have people who happen to be like a chair of a subcommittee and the acting mayor, the deputy mayor, which would take away some of the argument for including them. I think that it wouldn't solve all the issues, because there's still be people who felt like they're out because they're not in the EPC and they're in. But it does mean that it doesn't give the mayor a de facto majority, right? Now, the issue of not having an EPC, and in Winnipeg's EPC is far stronger than any else in Canada. I think Toronto's has some of the similar powers, not all the same powers, but it's a much smaller portion of council. So even where you see executive councils in other parts of Canada, they're not the same thing here. The issue you see in a lot of jurisdictions, and I'm as far as ward-based systems, I'm most familiar with Southern Ontario, and you have a tendency, once you get full-time councillors elected by ward, they tend to get very parochial, very focused on their ward interests, right? And that's because that's where they're elected. And if you don't give the mayor any authority, which is typically the case in Canada, they don't have a lot of institutional authority. You often have a very hard time to get to really realize any citywide agenda. And in our ward systems, the mayor is the only person elected by the city as a whole. So that's the idea of the EPC model, and it is a problem in other jurisdictions. Toronto's probably the most extreme case, because everybody refers to the wards as fiefdoms, and the councillors. It might change now that they reduced the number of wards. It might make it worse. I don't know. But it is a headache to actually make any real long-term decisions for the city when in that situation. On the one hand, I think the way the EPC has been used is a problem, because they shouldn't be included, the deputy mayor and the acting deputy mayor. But I do think the premise of the model makes sense. It's just how it's been used. I was surprised. I didn't realize everything went through the EPC. It seems to me, I would certainly, like anything budget related or any spending should probably go through it. But when you have like any planning decision has to go, like that to me is unusual. And I wonder that, again, I mean, that's in the charter, but I do wonder at that, whether that's necessary. And, you know, there's discussion in the report too about the amount of time people outside of the EPC had to actually go through the reports that are being provided. And I think that's a very valid issue too, and that would help. Yeah, and as far as there being sort of a, you know, two parties as a result, it has created that situation. That's not always absent, though, in a lot of jurisdictions. I mean, you know, Calgary has tended to have sort of, they aren't partisan. There's no party discipline, which means it's different than when you have political parties, but there's still sort of, you know, there's a lump over here that votes one way, typically a lump over here. So you're probably never going to get rid of that exactly. But at least the EPC, if it was working as intended, it's supposed to give the mayor some, like, you know, carrots and sticks to sort of herd the councillors. It's not supposed to give them like a de facto majority where they can control everything.
Right. So when you went through the governance review that's been published thus far, you probably would have noted in there that every report that is done at the City of Winnipeg has to go to the mayor's office. It's reviewed there, and changes can be made or directed by the mayor's office before it goes public or to other councillors. Is that common across this country? It seemed to me in reading the report in the jurisdictions they selected, which I had a bit of an issue with, but with the jurisdictions they selected, that's not common.
Yeah, we can talk about the jurisdiction selection. I have some issues with that too. But my sense, I mean, I'm not an expert on this. Like, there's so many different seats. My sense, though, is it's unusual for the mayor's office to have that much influence over it. Like the specific wording of reports and that sort of thing. Certainly, what I know the most about is planning. So like planning reports from, and yeah, most jurisdictions, they don't go through the mayor's office, right? They go directly from planning to whatever standing committee or community council is supposed to read it and discuss it. So yeah, that I think it's a bit problematic, you know. So, you know, if there's any discussion about reforming DPC, I don't think getting rid of it entirely is a good idea. But I think maybe some of the concentration of authority, removing that, because I also just don't think, I mean, basically all it does is lets the mayor influence the message on everything. And that's not what the point of these reports from staff is supposed to, right? Like, they're supposed to go for discussion among councillors. And so I do see that as an issue.
So let's go back then, because you and I share this frustration on the jurisdictions that were selected for comparison. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, there wasn't really an explanation. And they're using some of the same ones, and then they throw in like London, Ontario, or Surrey, BC, which I didn't understand. But there's a couple of issues. One is the size of some of them, so it's very difficult to compare to Toronto. And then the other thing, and this is the one issue with the report, they're talking about the actual like structure as it is in the legislation, all that. They're ignoring some other important features of these cities. Like, Montreal's a political party system and very strong discipline, which basically makes the mayor of Montreal the strongest mayor in Canada. So if you're going to talk about Montreal, I wouldn't even include it as to compare with. In Vancouver has a political party system. It also has an at-large system. Traditionally has been very technocratic as a result of it, so it's not a very good comparison either. I feel that there's a lot of these large suburban municipalities in places like British Columbia and Ontario, roughly the same size as Winnipeg, has similar sized councils. And in terms of like the development of their institutions, are probably at a similar pace. And I think so, like Mississauga or Brampton or Surrey, Surrey political parties again, so and at large, but Mississauga and Brampton, like a lot of these Ontario ones, would have been probably better to compare with.
So would you suggest that we should be looking at those jurisdictions, not only for this review, but looking for the best practices in trying to implement it? Because there's no, I guess what I'm asking is there one system that works, or are you looking to develop a system and using the best practices, or maybe making alterations of the current practice we have today? It would be insurmountable to try and change the act entirely right now.
Yeah.
But maybe this, a few changes here and a few changes there that would really make a significant impact on the way decisions are made at council. So is that done through best practices or just through our own internal investigation? Because so you're aware, all of the stuff in the governance came from a 45-minute interview with each councillor. That's it. We never heard about the other jurisdictions. I did because I asked. I said, well, what do you like? You're not asking us any questions about the executive policy model or any of these models. You're only asking us questions about information gathering and decision making. What's the purpose of that? And then they said, well, they've already been given the cities that they're supposed to compare us to. So to me, it seemed like we were missing out on a big part of doing research is finding, what's working and how you can work that into your own system.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of doing this type of review is looking at best practices. I mean, every city's different and you have to figure it out what works best for you. But looking at cities, to do that properly, you're going to want to look at ones that are the most comparable to the city of Winnipeg, and some of their choices, I really don't think you're going to learn much from them. And yeah, I mean, throw a wider net too, it's like, we're just going to look at the big cities in each province. Like, there's so much variation and difference between them though. And a lot of them, like the differences are too great to actually get anything substantial for comparing them. Whereas there's a lot of other cases you could have looked at, or they could have looked at that they don't include. And as I said, again, it's sort of this arbitrariness too, where there'll be like, there's one chart where they have Surrey thrown in there, but it's not in the rest of it. And then they mentioned London, Ontario. And I mean, London, Ontario, it's smaller. It's around 400,000 people, but again, very equivalent. And it's gone through a lot of changes with it. I know London's, I went to University of Western.
Okay.
So yeah, I know it pretty well. But it's also one of the overstudied cities because Western's known for studying local government. But it's gone through a lot of changes in its institutions. And so in that sense, it's a pretty good, it's a good petri dish for other cities to look at, see, okay, what is going horribly wrong there and what's working. So there's a lot of places we can look at. And I mean, I always complain, Winnipeg always seems to look at Edmonton as like, well, what's in Edmonton? We'll just emulate that. I'm like, it's not a horrible city or anything, but there's other places you can look to that might give you a sense of, a better sense of what works and what doesn't. And, I would certainly like to see that going forward, selecting some more of these more comparable size cities, and like get away from, we're just looking at big central cities, and a lot of which aren't really that comparable to Winnipeg.
So how would you get, and I guess you have to deal with this while you teach your students, how do you get the average person engaged in municipal level politics, or get them to be concerned or interested in the fact that we are going through a governance review? And I think it's probably one of the most important things we're doing right now as this council. And it seems like we're trying to push it through with, there's 4 other major, strategy plans that we're looking for public input on. And we're really, I think it's 3 or 4 dates for the review of governance. There's no online real questionnaire that talks about it. It's just here's what we have learned, and then they're comparing it. So it seems like I had a resident explain it to me that they've already determined the destination with what they've put together. They're just now having everyone follow their mapping to that destination. How do you get people engaged in municipal politics to want to fight for that change?
That's the hard part, right? I mean, getting people to even recognize how important municipalities are, it's difficult, and this is a challenge. I mean, Winnipeg, in terms of voter engagement, is actually at the higher end for voter turnout. I've been talking about Mississauga. I mean, they'll get below 30% turnout in an election there. Wow. That's normal for them. And in suburban municipalities, it's usually quite bad like that. So, I mean, this is one of the things, like, I don't have a concrete explanation. Yeah. The way I do it with my students is, I am like this year or this term, I'm teaching issues in city politics, which is great because I just pick issues I know they'll find interesting. But when I'm teaching city politics, which is really, this is the institution, municipal government, you have to give them a sense of why they should care about this. And one of the things I do is, I pick, and I mean, it does require people to actually pay attention to the news and actually look at local news. Because if you do that, you will start to see things that concerns and interest you. But you need to actually be actively looking for that. And when I force my students to read newspaper articles. Most of them are from Winnipeg. Sometimes I'll go far from that, depending on what I'm talking about. And they'll read it, and it'll get them agitated, and they're like, they'll get annoyed because like this doesn't make any sense. Like, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? And like, that's a good question, right? And this is why residents need to be more engaged. But obviously, getting anybody engaged in politics now it's very difficult. It's very difficult to do that, and I understand that. And it's also can be very frustrating because you can get engaged and feel like nothing changes as a result of that. But I think just emphasizing, when I teach the nuts and bolts and, they provide this service and that service and that sort of thing, it doesn't start to resonate with them until like I'll show them pictures of New York in the late 1800s with like piles of garbage and all the typhoid. I'm like, this is what happens if you don't have municipal level government, right? So I point at things like that, or like, we are occasionally dumping garbage into the rivers here. So, if we don't get funding from other sources, they're saying 75 years to fix that.
Yeah.
You have to like really point at specific things to sort of to jolt them into realizing that this matters. Because otherwise, if you're just talking about property taxes, which everybody hates to pay, and you have arguments over snowplows or something like that, people don't get that engaged with it, right? And that's a problem. We take it for granted. We really do, because for the most part, our municipalities in Canada aren't perfect, but most of them deliver the basic services because they have to, right? They don't have a choice. And so getting people to understand what goes into providing those services, right? And particularly in a day and age where municipalities are often relatively shortchanged in providing a lot of that's the what you have to do. But there's no single formula for doing that, unfortunately.
So, and you bring up a very valuable point. It really comes down to people get most concerned about basic services, if you will, that the city does. Because if you hear most of your complaints, it'll have something to do, either they don't like their neighbor, which seems to be a big one, or basic services, right? What the city provides. And really, I don't think as a city, we've ever reached out to residents. I can't find any research for it, and I don't know if other municipalities do, to reach out to residents and say, well, what's our core services? What are the core services of the city that are the most important to you? Because we'll find there's ways to cut there. And I know I'm kind of going off topic, but when you mentioned the services and getting people interested in the topics, is maybe that's what we have to do more of as a government, is get people more engaged, so that we know what they're willing to pay for and how much.
Yeah, no, that's I think a big thing that government needs to do. The City of London, again, they changed their electoral system to ranked balloting. Now the provincial government won't let them keep on with it. But anyway, so they went through that process, and I was asked about that, and people didn't really seem all that engaged in doing it. And they're like, well, how do you get people engaged? And the problem is how municipal governments do outreach, right? A lot of times their version of outreach is, well, we're going to post that, we're going to have a discussion in a newspaper and online, and hopefully people will show up. Part of the problem is people will, but it's generally the same people. And it's not to say we should ignore them. It's just that they're well, I just did a paper saying they're not representative of the average resident in the city. But you have to actively go out and grab people, right? Because most people, they just go out on their daily business, and they're not, they're presented as like, well, this is a town hall at 7 p.m. I'm done work. I don't feel like going to that sort of thing, right? So you do have to be very active in going out and directly contacting, interacting with people, right? And this is something, I mean, it's not like the federal provincial government are particularly good at that either. But this is something I think municipalities have to be a lot more active in doing, not just relying sort of passively putting out information and asking people to show up, but going out there, right? And there's different ways. Like, yeah, you can conduct surveys, but not like here's an online survey, which is a lot of what Winnipeg does. Like Facebook will say, here, participate in this. Like, well, you're not getting a representative sample that way. We know that. Whereas it costs more, but you can hire a firm that does surveys to actually do a survey and ensure that they're getting equal representation, stuff like that. I mean, that's an involved process because I've been involved in election surveys. I'm not a stats person myself, but I was involved as a local person for doing municipal election surveys. And you have to identify questions to ask that will actually get at the information you want without directing people towards a specific response. But yeah, you have to do that, right? And when you do town halls, when you have like meetings with people, stuff like that, you have to have a variety of them, times and different places to encourage different types of people to churn out. I mean, there's a growing sort of industry of people who that's their job, is like, how do we generate more people and get them involved and stuff like that? And we really need to engage that. I mean, the issue sometimes is, there are always actors who are quite happy with the status quo. And so doing it the passive way is like, well, we're doing it without really doing it. Or we're only getting the same people that everybody ignores anyway, so we don't have to worry about making change. So if you really, I think part of it, doing it like that too, is it actually shows the public you really, really want their opinion. The other thing too is if you get their opinion, act on it, right? Like that, and that could be different. You're going to get a whole variety of opinions. They could be contradictory. It's not a simple process, but you actually have to be showing to try to change as a result of it.
Wow, that's excellent. You opened up like another 4 hours of questions that I would have, which is what I miss about post-secondary education. But I think I wanted to ask you. I have two really, I think, good questions for me, anyways. How would you do you think that we do enough of that then with young people? Have we really left them out? Because I look at it as that anything we do today, somebody is obviously going to have to pay for it in in a century, because we tend to borrow an awful lot of money. But we don't seem to be including that next generation. If we started engaging them now, would that create that next generation of more engaged municipal voters, or is that something we need to do more of? Is that missing?
I think so. I mean, every person you reach out at a young age, some of them are going to drop off later on. It doesn't matter, but you're going to get more people. And I mean, that's what I try to do with my courses. But obviously, I get maybe 40 students a year in my courses. So, but that's what I try to do. And at the very least, I think when they leave, they have a better understanding of, what their government is doing and a lot of the issues they're facing. So I do think it's important outreach. The problem with the municipal level in particular too, is that the people who get most engaged are people who own homes, right? And today, I mean, Winnipeg, you can still get a home at a younger age. It's not like Toronto or Vancouver, but today it's still like that even sort of pushes the age that people get engaged even further off. And it also means you're missing out on a pretty big chunk of the population, which are renters and that sort of thing too. So I think engaging young people and encouraging to care, understanding too, like a lot of people, if it's not directly impacting their own neighborhood, they don't pay attention. Like, no, you need to care about the city as a whole. And I think it's always easier to get young people to understand and look at different perspectives and stuff than it is somebody like my age who I kind of have my views at this point in time.
Yeah.
So I think that's useful. I think
Yeah.
that's useful. Like to just reach out and really, like have presentations at high schools that are like, this is what your government does, right? That sort of
Yep.
thing. And again, pick the topics and examples that will resonate with them, right? So if you could have a debate about whether skateboarders should be able to go down every street or not, right? Like that's municipality that's preventing you from going down that street, so you should care about this kind of thing. It sounds silly, but that's you find the topics that will resonate with them, and that will get them discussing these things and understanding them. And I agree that it's important to do that.
I wish I would have had that advice a year and a half ago. I took it upon myself. One of my missions was, when in office, was to connect with as many young people as possible. And I did go to high schools and speak, but I didn't go with that in mind. Like, what will they engage with? I went to listen. Like, I just wanted them to talk. And it seemed that the most important things were a Wendy's close by, or they all wanted Popeye's chicken. So I feel like, even though I had nothing to do with it, that got accomplished. Maybe they think it was me, but interesting though, you're right. When you do get into things that engage them, the young people, oddly enough, in Charleswood all said, why do we have to have ditches? Why can't we have sidewalks? Because we all have to walk or ride our bikes on the road.
Yeah.
Now, if you talk to the more mature residents of Charleswood, and you even mention the word ditches or sidewalks and replacing ditches, well, that's a civil war. That, so it's interesting that those two things are different conversations. So I'm going to take that advice. So thank you very much for that. I also didn't want to miss the point of you saying that if you say you're going to do something, do it, because I think that's so important now. I think that's why so many people have just given up on politics. Like they don't care anymore. Like, because we can say whatever we want. And then, as an ex-media person, we all know that for the most part, in 48 hours, they've moved on to something else and they've completely forgotten about it. And that's just sad. Like I remember hearing Warren Buffett talking about it, that if every elected official should have the top 10 things they're going to do, and they're only allowed to run for election if they've accomplished 8 of them.
Yeah.
It's like a score. If you haven't accomplished 8 of the 10, you can't run again. You're not good at your job. We got to get somebody else in there. Never going to happen.
Yeah.
But my final question, because I don't want to keep you too long, and this has been great so far. Now that you've read the governance model, you've obviously spent some time in Winnipeg. You're engaged in the community. When you read the governance model, what would you suggest that we need to do next? Really looking at that. Okay, it's great. We're talking about it. It's a couple of Zoom sessions where I don't think people are going to get very engaged, especially at this time of what's happening. But really, what would you suggest we do to move forward with a governance as a city of Winnipeg? Because you've studied it. So what should we be doing as opposed to what we're doing right now?
Well, I mean, I think part of it, and hopefully this will generate some discussion, is I think the like what you're just saying, you need to identify what it is you actually want to change. Like what is most important right now, because doing wholesale change of everything is not going to be possible. So identify priorities. And once you have those priorities, you're like, look, this specific institution isn't functioning the way it would. Then you can start looking for real examples of where things are working better. Right, find cases that seem to work, and then try to identify whether this would work. Right, so if you're talking about like the EPC, like okay, I've given you examples why it's good to have one, but you can also look at cities that don't have one that may nonetheless seem to get by an absence of that, and say, like, well, what are they doing that's right? And I think that's it. Like, have some targeted things you want to address, and a focused sort of study on, okay, what is the problem with this practice? Not generalizations, but like, this is one of the problems when there's any type of review of anything, right? That we use this sort of broad language, but we don't actually talk about the practical ramifications of, if there's a problem, identify where the problems are and what steps we can do to change those. There's a lot of the discussion about change never gets that far. It's just broader discussions about these things. And, you know, so that would be my suggestion. I mean, part of it right now is, I mean, it's just like areas of opportunity. It's like, okay, well, that's great, which to me, it's like areas where there's some problems. But what, I mean, the report sort of identifies what it thinks it's most important. But I think it's incumbent on, you know, the city councillors, city staff, and talking to people about what's the most important thing for them. Because it's probably quite different than whatever is in this document here, which that's fine. This is about generating the discussion. But yeah, so that, anyways, that was a long-winded response to that question, but
no, not at all. Very, very thorough. Very good. So in this, it really should, I guess, I want to make sure that I'm correct in thinking this. So my thought listening to you would be that governance for a municipality, like it is for most corporations, really is a living, breathing document, and will change. It doesn't have to change at one particular point in time in history or on a regimented system of change. It can change as you identify areas of improvement or a way to improve a system. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah, I mean, not everybody agree with me, but I'm a supporter of incrementalism. I think wholesale revolutions and change, they can get rid of one problem and cause a whole other bunch of issues. And that's what happened when we switched from the commissioner system. So I think if you want to have positive, and it can be frustrating because it takes a lot longer than let's throw everything away and put something new in. But if you look at like the most functioning institutions in the world, they're ones that have gone through that incremental change over time. And the one good thing about the municipal level is that it's more flexible than the provincial and federal level. It's easier to enact change and make change. The public is more willing to accept change. So there's a lot of opportunity to do that. I mean, you know, the charter, that's a bit limiting in that. And certainly the province wouldn't be happy if you're like every few years asking them to amend the charter again. What you could do is ask them to amend the charter so it allows more flexibility in terms of how the city decides to govern itself. You know, that would be, I think, a useful dialogue to have. It doesn't need to be as rigid. And I think there's been, certainly since the early 2000s, the courts and provinces to an extent have recognized municipalities actually have capacity to run themselves and they are a level of government. So, you know, that would be a useful discussion to have with the provincial government and would give the city a bit more flexibility. But yeah, an incremental approach, identifying where the biggest bottlenecks are and addressing those. And like figuring out, you know, every time you make a change, it will cause other issues and stuff like that. But that's if you want to get towards something better, you have to do that, right? And I think that's definitely the direction to go. I'm always, you know, the whole like wholesale change thing. It's happened in Canada. We actually at the municipal level have done that a lot. We throw out something, bring in a new thing, and it's not so much that we get something that's always worse. It's just that we just come up with a whole bunch of other problems. Whereas how do we just taken what we had and sort of figured out how to work within the parameters of that and make that work? You know, and there'll be people that completely disagree with me on that, but that's how I view these things over time.
Yeah. This is, you know, this has been a great hour of my time. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
No, listen, this is Dr. Aaron Moore. For those of you listening, I guess I should have said that earlier, or through our discussion. But you know, I've learned from you on this one, and I'm somebody inside the building. Granted, I'm probably more frustrated than most people and bang my head against the wall more than most. But it is, to me, it just seems that we're not, you know, you get into politics and you think, you know, we're gonna make some difference. We're gonna start moving policies. Little baby steps is how I always like to look at things, because I'm like you. I think if you make, it's like in a corporation, if you make one big change at once and maybe your sales climb, multiple levels, and you think this is the greatest thing, well, they can drop just as quickly because of that change. Whereas if if you take your time and you build over time, and it's sustainable, it's certainly the way that I would approach it. But I've learned a lot, especially on how to engage with people or re-engage with residents on this. I hope I'm gonna, make sure that we get together again, because I think there's more that we can learn, and I say we by the people listening and myself, because you really have given me a different perspective in some ways and confirmed my perspective on others. But I mean, like you said, it's still a learning process. It's a living process. So we've got to be able to change. It's such a great topic, and really a great opportunity. And thank you for reading through the book. Were you shocked at anything else? Like, was there anything that stood out and you went, "Wow, I would fail this person"?
I mean, it was there were more. I was hoping for more, but it's also a preliminary report. And yeah, I mean, the main thing, there was also some of the depiction of what happened in other parts of the country were not entirely correct, right? But to be fair, I mean, it's really hard to collect all of that knowledge. I mean, I'm considered an expert, but I also think I've only touched a bit of it, right? And so I'm still in this process of learning. I'm constantly learning. I've been in Winnipeg for a little over 7 years, and I was learning things about how the city. I didn't realize everything was filtering through the EPC. So I think just as a document from that perspective, is actually it's quite useful for me. It's like, okay, this, and I remember coming here, growing up and doing all my education in Ontario and having to teach students and wanting to incorporate stuff from Winnipeg, but knowing nothing about it, right? So I've been having to learn the differences, right? And there's a lot of differences across Canada when it comes to municipalities. So, I think as long as we realize that, and we realize we're always continuously learning, I think that's great. I'm happy to be part of that.
I appreciate it. You know what? I'm going to have to ask you this question because I think it's one that's missing. Sorry, and just if you don't mind.
Yep, no worries.
Do you think when officials get elected, shouldn't they have to go through some kind of some kind of course or something so that they know what their job is, or they understand what they're there to do? Like, do you think that I think that's so necessary.
I think so. I mean, part of the issue at the municipal is at the federal and provincial level, the party system sort of acts as a system to do that. And there's a lot of institutional memory. So you get a new minister. Well, you have all of the deputy ministers and all these other people whose jobs it is to inform them of what they're supposed to be doing. And the parties themselves have all of these internal people who have been there for decades. At the municipal level, you just have a councillor shows up. City staff aren't really inclined to show them the ropes about anything, right?
No.
So unless you have a councillor that maybe was working for a councillor before for an extended period of time and understands more about the internal operations, chances are they're not going to have any knowledge, and that's a recurring issue. And I've had councillors talk about they're amazed to learn how the property tax worked. Right? Which, well, nobody understands how it works. I don't even know if half the people that work for a city understand how it works. So I'm gonna stop you there. Then can you tell us how it works? Okay, I will. Okay. Part of it is Winnipeg has one of the most convoluted systems for doing it. So we assess property. We do that through 3 ways. I'm not going to talk about that as it's convoluted. The easiest way is, for homes, we compare homes to homes that are sold, and we get sort of a base price of what a homes is, and depending on what part of the city is and that sort of thing. And then it's applied against a mill rate. And our mill rate, it's basically like $1 for every $1,000 that the house is assessed at. In most other jurisdictions, it's just expressed it as a percentage. So that's how you calculate it, except we also have the apportion rate, which is set by the provincial government. So you take whatever our mill rate is, but you're only applying it to, I think for housing is 0.45 or is 45% of the house. So that gets you, your amount. What a lot of people don't understand, those property taxes, it's not like you just leave the rate where it is, and if houses go up, the city gets more money. It doesn't work that way. The city is constantly adjusting its rate. And when the city says, you know, like Brian Bowman, you know, he's every year we've been raising the taxes by 2.1%. That's not an increase in the property tax rate. That's an increase in how much the average property tax bill will be. It's completely separate. And I think a lot of people, they actually think it's the same as when the province said we're increasing the sales tax by 2%. It's not the same. It's incredibly different. It's also when the provincial government does that, they're actually talking percentage points, which I think the increase was actually 16% when they increased the PST. So what that means is that, yeah, every year, I mean, they're reassessing homes every few years. They can't just, it's not like the income tax. It's not just going to grow year to year because the economy is growing. So that means if you want to keep a pace with inflation, you are going to raise it every year. And that means people's bills are going to change. And, you know, that's what people don't understand, right? It's like, a lot of people I know, and particularly in Toronto, Vancouver, like, oh, our housing prices are going up, so we're paying more property tax. Like, you're not. They have the lowest property tax rates in Canada. They've lowered it because the housing prices have gone up. So it's more of a measure of like the city says, how much money do we need to pay for services this year? And then they set the property tax rate, and that's how you get your bill. And that's also why it will fluctuate. Like mine's gone up and down. I've had a house for 2 years and it's been adjusted like 3 times. So that's this very simple way of explaining it. But if you get that across to people, it's like when we're saying we're increasing it, it's not that we're increasing the rate. It's just, this is what you can expect your bill to go up. Just like if you're paying attention, your income tax has been going up as you've made more money over time. Or, you know, if you're buying more stuff, you're paying more GST. Problem with the income taxes is very visible. You get a bill and it says you're going to pay like $2,000 or $4,000. Half of that, of course, is going to the school divisions anyways, which a lot of people don't seem to get that either. Yeah, so that's my synopsis of it. I actually have great slides for that. So.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah, I do.
I should come and see them. I would love to come and see them.
Yeah,
and I think we should do a whole thing on that, because I agree that is the one area that you are right. Nobody understands, especially when it comes to mill rate. Because the mill rate's going to go up no matter what. So your taxes are going to change on that because the mill rate's going to change a bit. And then, you know, if it goes up 2.3, it's always 2.3%. Then we have a frontage levy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have the extra property taxes in Winnipeg that a lot of other places don't. So
yeah,
frontage levy, yeah, one of them.
We pretend they're not property. They're frontage levies.
Yeah.
Frontage levies, something entirely different. And then, you know, talking to an economist friend of mine who said, you know, we sold an awful lot of homes with an impact fee. He goes, which builders paid the impact fee upon getting their permits, but they sold them at the house at a higher rate to cover the cost of the impact fee. He goes, so you artificially inflated the cost of a home anyways, and now that's gone back down, but that person still paid this amount of money. He goes, all of these different taxes that we've tried to put in, or different plans that we've attempted to put in, he goes, really, you've just confused your system even more. Because you had an impact fee, then you don't have an impact. And trust me, they're going to try to bring it back. They want to bring it back. They already said they're going to bring it back. So that's all. We're going to have to do that, because that's a great topic, and you have a great way of explaining it. And I would love to see the slides.
Yeah, I'd be happy.
Do we have the lowest property tax in Canada when you put it all together?
So if you take out the residential property tax, and when you're comparing, you can't, like, the rate is meaningless. You have to look at the average property tax amount, like how much you're paying. We are at the lower end for big cities in Canada. Now, if you look at smaller communities and some of the suburban municipalities, actually a lot of suburban municipalities are higher now I think about it. So we are actually relatively low. The thing though, when you're comparing, you also have to keep in mind that different cities do different things. So in Toronto, they're paying for subsidized housing there, right? They're paying for a lot of social services, which we don't pay for. So we're competitive on that. I think a lot of people get the sense we're not. Part of that, though, again, is there's a report a while ago, they're just looking at the rates. And it's like, well, if we applied this rate for a $300,000 home in Winnipeg, we're paying way more than $300,000 home in Toronto. I'm like, there are no $300,000 homes in Toronto. Like that, and again, getting that across to people, no, you want to look at the average rate. I mean, the city, any of those comparisons are always flawed, right? They're never perfect. So, you know, the city, I know they took their initial report from Calgary and sort of adjusted based on what they thought was a better way to do it. And Winnipeg moved down the list a bit more. So, you know, there's always that happening there. But I mean, as far as big cities go, we're not that bad off. One of our big problems, though, is we share the tax with the school divisions, which most other cities in Canada don't. And that makes it harder to increase property taxes, because, you know, property taxpayers there is actually a limit to property tax, right? There's this theoretical limit, and it's a real limit. We know, we can look at Detroit and see that at some point, if you raise it too high, your revenue drops, right? So I think that's one of the big issues here. So if the province actually went through with what they said and that they're going to get rid of it, the problem is they do that, they're going to give municipalities more responsibilities. That's what they've done across Canada. So
yeah, it's never just a gift.
No.
Cover it. Again, Dr. Aaron Moore teaches political science at the University of Manitoba and an expert on municipal politics, municipal governments, and we certainly have learned that in the last hour. We have to talk again. I can't thank you enough for this session. I have this sense of wanting to go take poli-sci you know, sign up for a few of your courses, and I might do that in the next semester.
Mandate all counselors take my intro course. How's that? So yeah,
we should. We should. I think we absolutely should. But, you know, thank you so much for your time. This has been, as I said, it's been a great conversation and such a learning experience. I can't thank you enough.
No problem. And I really enjoy doing this. I mean, I think this is, I'm one of these academics who really likes to talk with people outside of academia. And I think part of my job, you know, cast you a little shade there, but I think part of my job is to take what I know, and I've always done that, and try to encourage people to learn about how their communities work.
I have a good friend who's also a professor at the U of M, but he teaches Greek mythology. So him and I don't have a lot of good conversations outside of that.
Yeah,
anyways,
I'm in a position where I'm probably in a bit more demand for to talk to another, and you know, that's fair.